The amber glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across Leonard Mitchell's worn leather chair as he studied the papers before him. 20 years as a private investigator had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about James Morton's case made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The prominent tech entrepreneur's financial records showed a clean transfer of $5 million to an offshore account, too clean, almost surgical in its precision. Leonard ran his fingers through his graying hair, the familiar tension headache building behind his eyes. Morton sat across from him, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Leonard's monthly rent. There was something rehearsed about the way he described the supposed theft, something calculated in his carefully measured pauses. "Mr. Morton, walk me through this one more time," Leonard said, his voice gravelly from too many late nights and not enough sleep. "You're saying you had no idea about this transfer until your quarterly review?" Morton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Correct. Someone managed to bypass our security protocols. They knew exactly what they were doing. I need you to find out who did this and get my money back." Leonard made a show of reviewing the documents, but his mind was already racing ahead. The timestamp on the transfer caught his attention, 3:47 a.m. on a Sunday. Who would be making legitimate transfers at that hour? More importantly, who would have access to the necessary authorization codes? "Your wife, Catherine, she's listed as a co-signer on these accounts?" Leonard asked, watching Morton's reflection in the window behind his desk. A flash of something, anger, fear, crossed Morton's face before disappearing behind his practiced smile. "Yes, but Catherine wouldn't. She's been by my side for 15 years. She helped build this company." Leonard nodded, jotting down notes more for show than necessity. He'd learned long ago that the real story often lay in what people didn't say. "And your daughter, Sarah? How old is she now?" 19. "She's at Berkeley." Morton's response came too quickly, too sharply. "What does she have to do with any of this?" "Just building a complete picture, Mr. Morton. In cases like these, the smallest detail could be important." Leonard leaned back, studying his potential client. "My fee is $5,000 a day, plus expenses. No guarantees, but I'll find out what happened to your money." Morton wrote the check without hesitation, another red flag. Men like him usually negotiated, if only out of habit. "I want daily updates, Mr. Mitchell. And complete discretion. If word of this gets out." "Discretion is my middle name," Leonard assured him, accepting the check. "I'll start first thing tomorrow." After Morton left, Leonard sat in the growing darkness, listening to the hum of traffic 17 floors below. Something about this case felt wrong, like a puzzle with too many pieces. He pulled up Morton's company website on his laptop, scrolling through the carefully curated photos of a successful family man. Catherine Morton's smile didn't quite reach her eyes in any of them. A quick search revealed more: charitable donations, tech conference keynotes, society page photographs. The perfect power couple. But Leonard had been in this business long enough to know that perfection usually meant someone was working very hard to hide something. He opened his encrypted database, beginning a new file. Years of experience had taught him to document everything from the start. You never knew which detail might turn out to be crucial. As he typed, a news alert popped up on his screen: Morton Technologies announces major security partnership. The article mentioned government contracts, cybersecurity initiatives, and 9-figure deals. Leonard's unease grew. $5 million was a lot of money to most people, but to someone like James Morton, it was practically pocket change. Why hire a private investigator instead of handling it internally? Leonard's phone buzzed, an encrypted message from one of his contacts at the SFPD: "Watch yourself with Morton. Not as clean as he looks." He sent back a simple acknowledgement, then sat back, staring at the city lights beyond his window. The smart play would be to return Morton's check, tell him to handle it internally. But something about Catherine Morton's eyes in those photographs, something about the timing of that transfer. Leonard saved his notes and shut down his computer. He had work to do, starting with a deep dive into the Morton family's background. As he locked up his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much bigger, and much more dangerous, than a simple case of missing money. In the elevator, he checked his watch. Just past midnight. The perfect time to start asking the kind of questions that people like James Morton didn't want asked. The kind of questions that might get uncomfortable answers. Leonard smiled grimly as he stepped into the cool night air. Sometimes the truth was worth the price you had to pay for it. The message arrived at dawn, just as Leonard was reviewing Morton's financial records. A simple text from an unknown number, Garden Cafe on Powell Street. 9 a.m. Come alone. Below it, a single initial, K. Leonard sat at a corner table, watching Catherine Morton through the cafe window as she approached. She moved with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being observed, but there was tension in her shoulders, a slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her designer sunglasses. She slid into the seat across from him without ordering, her composure a carefully constructed facade that Leonard had seen countless times before, the mask people wore when their world was crumbling around them. "You know who took the money," Leonard said. It wasn't a question. Catherine's laugh held no humor. "I took it." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "The real question, Mr. Mitchell, is whether you're interested in truth or just in earning your fee." Leonard studied her face, noting the slight makeup covering what might have been a bruise near her temple. "Why don't you tell me about the truth, Mrs. Morton?" "Catherine, please." She glanced around the cafe, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn tabletop. "James isn't who everyone thinks he is. The charitable donations, the public image, it's all carefully crafted fiction. Behind closed doors." She paused, collecting herself. The money wasn't stolen. It was insurance. Insurance against what? Against him. Catherine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "James has been using the company to launder money for years. Defense contracts that never existed, shell companies, offshore accounts, it's all a facade. But that's not the worst of it." Leonard leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "Go on." 3 months ago, Sarah, our daughter, discovered something on his private server. Files that shouldn't exist. Evidence of things that. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. "He's been selling classified technology to foreign buyers. Military-grade systems. When Sarah confronted him, She touched the concealed bruise unconsciously. He hurt her. He threatened her. Said he'd make sure she never graduated, never worked in tech again. Said he'd destroy her life like he destroyed his last partner's." Catherine's hands clenched into fists. "I couldn't let that happen. Not to my daughter." Leonard thought about the alert from his police contact, about the too-perfect transfer. The money, its protection for Sarah. And evidence. Everything he's done, everyone he's hurt, it's all documented. I've spent months gathering proof, tracking his real business dealings. She reached into her bag, producing a small flash drive. "This contains enough information to destroy him. But I need help. Mrs. Morton, Catherine, you're asking me to go against my client. To potentially implicate myself in Dash. I'm asking you to help save my daughter." Her eyes met his, unflinching. "James hired you because he thinks you're just another man he can buy. Prove him wrong." Leonard sat back, feeling the weight of the moment. In 20 years, he'd learned to navigate the gray areas between right and wrong, but this was something else entirely. "He's looking for the money," Catherine continued. "But what he's really afraid of is the truth getting out. When he realizes I have proof of everything." She left the sentence unfinished. "Why come to me? Why take the risk? Because I did my homework, Mr. Mitchell. 10 years ago, you exposed the Henderson corruption scandal, even though it cost you your police career. You chose truth over loyalty then. I'm hoping you'll make the same choice now. Leonard thought about Morton's too-perfect story, about Catherine's hidden bruise, about Sarah caught in the middle of it all. If what you're saying is true, this goes way beyond a missing $5 million. It goes all the way to the top. Military contracts, government officials, James has dirt on everyone. Catherine stood, placing the flash drive on the table. You have 24 hours to decide. Help me protect my daughter, or give that drive to James. Either way, I need to know where you stand. As she walked away, Leonard picked up the drive, feeling its weight in his palm. The cafe around him continued its morning bustle, oblivious to the decision being made in their midst. His phone buzzed, another message from his police contact, Morton's making calls. High places. Watch your back. Leonard pocketed the drive, his mind already racing through implications. Catherine had just handed him enough explosives to destroy multiple lives, including, potentially, his own. The question wasn't just whether he believed her. The question was whether the truth was worth the price they'd all have to pay. The Berkeley campus hummed with late-afternoon activity as Leonard made his way toward the computer science building. Each step felt weighted with the responsibility of Catherine's flash drive, still untouched in his pocket. 20 years of investigative work had taught him never to take anyone's word at face value, not even a desperate mother's. Sarah Morton sat exactly where her roommate said she'd be, tucked away in a quiet corner of the library's third floor. She had her father's sharp features but her mother's eyes, and something else Leonard recognized immediately, the watchful tension of someone living under constant scrutiny. Your mother sent me, he said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. The words triggered a subtle shift in her posture, not relief, but resignation. Did she show you? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, her fingers continuing to type on her laptop as if they were discussing nothing more significant than the weather. The evidence? Not yet. I wanted to hear your version first. Sarah's hands stilled over the keyboard. For a moment, she looked much younger than her 19 years. Everyone thinks my father is this brilliant innovator, this visionary who's revolutionizing cybersecurity. They don't see what's underneath. The deals, the threats, the people who disappear when they ask too many questions. Leonard thought about Morton's perfectly crafted public image. What did you find on his server? It started with discrepancies in the defense contracts. Lines of code that didn't match the official submissions. Sarah's voice took on a controlled intensity. I thought I was being thorough, double-checking everything like he taught me. Then I found the real programs, backdoors built into security systems, surveillance capabilities that shouldn't exist. He's not protecting people, Mr. Mitchell. He's selling access to the highest bidder. That's a serious accusation. Why do you think I'm here instead of Stanford? A bitter smile crossed her face. He said it was because Berkeley had a better program. The truth? Stanford's too close to his corporate headquarters. Too many chances I might accidentally run into the wrong people, say the wrong thing. Leonard noticed the way she angled herself away from the library's security cameras, the practiced casualness of her movements. Your mother mentioned threats. Did she tell you about Uncle David? Sarah's eyes met his, challenging. Dad's original partner in the company? The official story is that he had a mental breakdown, lost everything in a divorce. The truth? He found out about the back doors, threatened to go public. A week later, his wife left him, taking everything. 3 months after that, he wrapped his car around a tree. The police called it an accident. Leonard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's air conditioning. You have proof. I have enough to ask the right questions. Mom has the rest. Sarah closed her laptop, her movements deliberate. Dad always said I was just like him, that I could see patterns others missed. He meant it as a compliment. He never thought I'd use that ability to uncover his own patterns. A group of students walked past, laughing about something on their phones. Sarah waited until they passed before continuing. The 5 million? It's nothing compared to what he's really worth. But it's enough to get attention, to make him sloppy. Mom's smart, she knew he'd hire someone like you instead of handling it internally. Too much risk of his own people discovering what she took along with the money. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about money or corporate espionage. People who expose things like this don't get second chances. Sarah began packing up her books, each movement precise. Dad taught me that success is about controlling the narrative. Right now, he thinks he controls this one. Mom's just his unstable wife, I'm just his naive daughter, and you're just another tool he can use. Leonard thought about Catherine's bruised temple, about David's convenient accident. What do you want from me? The same thing Mom wants, the truth to come out in a way that keeps us alive. She stood, shouldering her backpack. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from your office. I'll be there tomorrow at 10. If you've looked at what's on that drive and you're still willing to help us, show up. If not. She shrugged. Well, I guess we'll have our answer. As she walked away, Leonard noticed what he'd missed earlier, the slight limp in her right leg, carefully disguised but visible to trained eyes. He remembered Morton's words about Sarah confronting him, Catherine's unfinished sentence about what happened next. His phone vibrated, a text from Morton demanding an update. Leonard stared at it, thinking about patterns and narratives, about the weight of truth and the price of silence. In his pocket, the flash drive seemed to pulse with dangerous potential. The sun was setting by the time he left the campus, casting long shadows across the historic buildings. In his 2 decades of investigation, Leonard had learned that the most dangerous secrets weren't hidden in darkness, they were hidden in plain sight, protected by wealth and power and carefully constructed stories. As he drove back to his office, he thought about Sarah's words about patterns, about Catherine's desperate gamble, about all the narratives waiting to unravel. The truth was there, in the intersections of their stories. The question was whether he was willing to risk everything to expose it. The data from Catherine's flash drive glowed on Leonard's screen, casting harsh shadows across his office as midnight approached. Each document, each transaction log, each carefully hidden trail of breadcrumbs told a story of power corrupted and lives destroyed. The evidence was damning, not just of James Morton, but of an entire network of influence that reached into the highest levels of government and industry. Leonard's hands trembled slightly as he poured another measure of bourbon. 20 years of investigating other people's secrets had taught him to maintain professional distance, to see cases as puzzles to be solved rather than lives to be changed. But this was different. The faces of Catherine and Sarah Morton haunted him, their quiet desperation a mirror reflecting his own past choices. His phone buzzed, another message from Morton, need update. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. The timestamp reminded Leonard of Sarah's invitation to the coffee shop at 10. 2 paths diverging, each with its own price. He closed his eyes, remembering the day he'd walked away from his police career. The Henderson case had seemed straightforward at first, just another corruption investigation. But like this one, it had grown roots, reaching into places that powerful people preferred to keep hidden. He'd chosen truth then, watching his career and reputation crumble in the aftermath. The bourbon burned going down as Leonard opened another file. Financial records showed regular payments to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The same company appeared in police reports about David Morton's accident, a detail buried so deep it had taken him hours to find it. "You're getting too close to this," he muttered to himself, but the words rang hollow. The truth was, he'd been too close from the moment Catherine showed him that bruise, from the instant he recognized in Sarah's eyes the same haunted look he'd seen in too many victims who'd learned to hide their pain. His desk drawer still held Morton's check, uncashed. Next to it lay his old police badge, a reminder of what integrity could cost. The city lights beyond his window blurred as he remembered his partner's words the day he turned in the Henderson evidence, sometimes staying silent is its own kind of justice. But silence had never brought justice. Silence had only ever protected the powerful, leaving the vulnerable to fight their battles alone. Leonard's computer chimed, an encrypted message from his police contact, Morton's making moves. High-level meetings all day. Whatever you're into, it's stirring up hornets. He thought about David Morton's convenient accident, about Catherine's carefully hidden bruises, about Sarah living in fear on a college campus that should have been her sanctuary. The evidence on his screen painted a picture of a man who'd built an empire on other people's silence. The bourbon was gone, but the tremor in Leonard's hands had steadied. He began copying files, encrypting them, sending them through secure channels to trusted contacts. Not enough to expose everything, not yet, but enough to ensure the truth wouldn't die with him if Morton decided to follow David's example. Dawn was breaking when Leonard finally stood, his decision crystallizing with the growing light. The past 24 hours had stripped away the comfortable illusions of professional detachment, forcing him to confront the truth he'd always known: there was no such thing as neutral ground in the face of systematic abuse of power. His phone buzzed one final time. Morton again, expect full report tomorrow. No excuses. Leonard thought about patterns and choices, about the price of truth and the cost of silence. He thought about Catherine's quiet strength and Sarah's desperate courage. Most of all, he thought about the man he'd been 20 years ago, standing before his police captain with damning evidence in his hands, choosing truth over career, justice over security. The city was waking up outside his window, the early morning light painting possibilities across the skyline. In 9 hours, he was supposed to meet Morton, to play his part in maintaining the carefully constructed facade. In 10 hours, Sarah would be waiting in that coffee shop, hoping someone would finally choose truth over power. Leonard reached for his jacket, feeling the weight of decades of choices in every movement. The game wasn't just about exposing Morton anymore, it was about breaking the cycles of power and silence that allowed men like him to thrive. It was about choosing, once again, to stand on the side of truth, whatever the cost. The coffee shop buzzed with morning energy as Sarah watched Leonard slide into the seat across from her. In the harsh morning light, exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes held a clarity that made her breath catch. She recognized that look, the same quiet determination she'd seen in her mother's eyes the night they decided to fight back. "I've seen the evidence," Leonard said softly, his words barely carrying over the espresso machine's hiss. "All of it." Catherine emerged from the crowd, appearing so naturally it seemed choreographed. The three of them sat in a triangle of shared purpose, their coffee cups forming a barrier against the outside world. In that moment, Leonard saw them clearly, not as victims seeking rescue, but as warriors choosing their battlefield. "James expects me in his office in 45 minutes, Leonard said, spreading his papers on the table. Each document represented a piece of their strategy, carefully crafted through his sleepless night. "He thinks I'm coming to report that I've traced the money to an anonymous hacker. Instead, I'm going to tell him something far more interesting." Catherine's fingers tightened around her cup. "The truth? A version of it. One that gives us leverage." Leonard pulled out a detailed timeline he'd constructed. "Your husband's brilliant, but he has one crucial weakness: he believes his own lies. He's convinced himself that you're both too afraid to act against him. That certainty has made him careless." Sarah leaned forward, her tech-trained mind already seeing the pattern. "The back doors in the security systems." "Exactly." Leonard nodded. "He's been so focused on selling access to others, he never considered someone might use his own tools against him. Every surveillance system he's compromised, every piece of data he's collected, it's all connected to servers that Sarah found. Servers that, thanks to Catherine's careful planning, now contain evidence of his entire operation." "But that's not enough," Catherine interjected. "James has contingencies. People in high places who'll protect him." Leonard's smile held no warmth. That's what he thinks. But power built on secrets is fragile. Each person in his network is a potential weak point. They'll protect him only as long as the cost of loyalty is less than the price of betrayal. He laid out more documents, each one representing a strand in Morton's web of influence. While you were gathering evidence of his crimes, he was gathering evidence against his allies. Insurance, he probably thought. But insurance only works if you control who sees it. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood. The dead man's switch mom built into the transfer. Not just the money, Leonard confirmed. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence, it's all set to release to specific journalists, prosecutors, and oversight committees if anything happens to any of you. Or to me. Catherine's hand found Sarah's under the table. How do we know he won't still try to silence us? Because in 30 minutes, I'm going to explain to James exactly what that would mean. Not just exposure of his crimes, but the collapse of his entire network. Every corrupt official, every compromised system, every dirty deal, all of it public. His allies would turn on him before the day was out. He won't take that well, Sarah warned. No, he won't. Leonard's voice carried the weight of certainty. That's why this isn't just about exposing him. It's about giving him a choice, one that protects what he cares about most. His reputation, Catherine breathed. His legacy, Leonard corrected. We offer him a chance to step down quietly. To transfer control of the company to Sarah, his brilliant daughter following in his footsteps. The press will love it. The board will accept it. Most importantly, it gives him a way to surrender without admitting defeat. Sarah straightened, years of learned fear battling with emerging strength. You think he'll agree? He's a businessman above all else. When he understands that fighting means losing everything, he'll take the deal that lets him save face. Leonard checked his watch. But first, we need to be ready for his initial reaction. He'll rage, threaten, try to call our bluff. That's why I've arranged some insurance of our own. He pulled out his phone, showing them a series of messages. Remember his partner David's accident? The police wrote it off as a drunk driving incident. But there was a witness, someone who's been carrying that secret for years, waiting for a chance to come forward. Someone who's willing to testify about who really ordered David's brake lines cut. Catherine closed her eyes, years of suppressed emotion crossing her face. David was my friend. He tried to warn me, before. Now he'll help us one last time, Leonard said gently. His story, combined with your evidence, makes the threat real. James won't be able to dismiss it as a bluff. The morning crowd was thinning, the rhythm of the city shifting as another day took shape. Leonard gathered his papers, each movement deliberate. The next few hours will be crucial. Catherine, you'll need to be ready with the legal documents for the transfer of power. Sarah, your role is to make the transition look natural to the outside world. And you? Sarah asked. I'm going to remind your father that sometimes the strongest move is knowing when to walk away. Leonard stood, straightening his jacket. Whatever happens, remember, you're not just fighting against something. You're fighting for a future where truth matters more than power. As he walked toward the door, Catherine called after him. Leonard? Why are you really helping us? He turned back, seeing in their faces the same quiet courage he'd once seen in a mirror, years ago when he'd chosen truth over career. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons or money. They're fought with the simple decision to stop being afraid. The morning sun painted long shadows across the sidewalk as Leonard walked toward his meeting with James Morton. In his pocket, he carried enough evidence to destroy an empire. But his real weapon was something far more powerful, the understanding that true change begins not with grand gestures, but with the quiet choice to stand up, speak out, and reclaim one's own story. The setting sun painted Morton Technologies' boardroom in shades of amber and shadow, a fitting backdrop for the end of an era. Leonard watched as James Morton's hands trembled slightly while signing the final document, not from fear, but from the carefully contained rage of a man used to defeat. Catherine sat beside her daughter, their quiet strength filling the room more powerfully than Morton's barely suppressed fury. Sarah's voice carried clear and steady as she read the press statement they'd crafted. In light of my father's desire to pursue personal projects and philanthropic endeavors, the board has approved my appointment as CEO, ensuring Morton Technologies remains a family-led innovation pioneer. The words were perfect, a story the public would embrace, that shareholders would celebrate. A narrative that gave James Morton a graceful exit while concealing the ugly truths that had brought them to this moment. Leonard caught the flash of pride in Catherine's eyes as she watched her daughter command the room that had once been her prison. Hours earlier, in that same room, Leonard had laid out their evidence before Morton. He remembered the moment the realization had dawned in the businessman's eyes, not just that he'd lost, but that he'd been outmaneuvered by the very people he'd thought he controlled. "You really think you can run this company?" Morton had sneered at Sarah, one last attempt to wound. Sarah had met his gaze, years of fear transformed into quiet certainty. "I think I can run it better. Without the back doors, without the bribes, without building our success on other people's pain. That's what really terrifies you, isn't it? Not that I'll fail, but that I'll succeed, and prove that your way was never necessary." Now, watching the lawyers file out with their documents, Leonard saw the subtle shifts in power playing out across the room. Board members who'd once fawned over Morton now gravitated toward Sarah, sensing the changing tide. Catherine stood slightly straighter, no longer carrying the weight of secrets and fear. "The funds you took," Morton said to Catherine, his voice low and dangerous, "they'll be returned?" "To the charities you claimed to support," Catherine replied. "The real ones, not your shell companies. Consider it the first step in rebuilding the Morton legacy." The last ray of sunlight caught the edge of Leonard's old police badge, still in his pocket where he'd placed it this morning. Its weight felt different now, not a reminder of what he'd lost, but of what could be preserved when people chose truth over power, courage over comfort. "Mr. Mitchell." Morton's voice stopped Leonard as he turned to leave. "I assume we won't be seeing each other again." Leonard studied the man who'd built an empire on others' silence. "That depends entirely on you. The evidence stays sealed as long as they remain safe and in control. Break that agreement, and every journalist in the country gets an early Christmas present. You're really willing to risk everything for them? Your reputation? Your life?" Morton's question carried genuine curiosity beneath the threat. "I risked those things the moment I chose this profession," Leonard replied. "The real question is whether you're willing to risk everything just to maintain control. Looking at your daughter now, I'd say you've already lost what really mattered." The boardroom emptied slowly, the day's events settling into history. Sarah lingered by the window, her reflection overlaying the city sprawled below. "I always thought changing things would require some grand gesture," she said as Leonard approached. "I never imagined it would happen like this, with paperwork and press releases." "Real change usually happens in the quiet moments," Leonard observed. "In the choices we make when no one's watching. Your father built his power on grand gestures that hid ugly truths. You'll build something different." Catherine joined them, her hand finding Sarah's shoulder. The gesture carried years of unspoken understanding, of shared survival transformed into shared triumph. "What will you do now?" she asked Leonard. He thought about the cases piling up on his desk, about all the other secrets waiting to be uncovered. "Keep looking for the truth. It's what I know. Even knowing the cost." Sarah's question echoed her father's, but carried different weight. Leonard smiled, thinking of all the moments that had led him here, from a young police officer choosing integrity over career to a private investigator helping a family reclaim their story. "The truth isn't measured in dollars or reputation," he said. "It's measured in lives changed, in stories reclaimed, in quiet moments of courage." As they walked out of Morton Technologies together, Leonard realized something profound had shifted, not just in the balance of power within one company, but in his understanding of his own role in the world. Every case wasn't just about uncovering facts, it was about giving people the chance to rewrite their own narratives. The city lights blinked on as darkness fell, each one representing countless untold stories waiting to emerge. Leonard thought about his next case, already waiting on his desk. But tonight, watching Catherine and Sarah drive away toward their reclaimed future, he allowed himself to appreciate this moment, when truth had triumphed not through force or grand revelations, but through the quiet courage of people choosing to stand together against the dark. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest victories weren't marked by headlines or celebrations, but by the simple reality of people walking free under the evening sky, carrying their own truth with pride. And in the end, that was worth any price.